On the Independence Project, our focus is on the marine environment and specifically the flourishing yachting sector. The potential economic impact is huge and so too the environmental concerns. Mr. Cuthbert Didier is our guest today. Mr. Didier, welcome to Calabash TV.
And thanks for having me. Hello to your viewers.
And we're here to speak with you because you've done a consultancy recently for IWECO for the development of a public-private partnership to reduce marine pollution from pleasure vessels such as yachts and tourism centers. Before we get into the conversation, I wanted to ask you something just about the topic alone. In terms of the development of a public-private partnership, yes or no, have we started working on that partnership as yet?
No.
Okay, so the next question is, how far have we got to reducing marine pollution?
We've gotten nowhere.
So basically, I guess that'll guide our discussion, because I wanted to start with that. So first of all, what commission and how did it come about that you did this particular consultancy?
Well, CAFRA reached out to me. That's the regional institution that deals with sustainable development and issues to do with the CARIFORUM area, their head office being in Trinidad. And basically I responded, I showed my interest, and this was in the peak of COVID, so obviously it was a desktop research, reaching out, interviews, etc. The rationale, it's a part of a broader UNDP program, and one of the components was basically to find some research as to the significance of pleasure craft pollution. That's mostly yachts traversing in the region, and also hotels and tourism sites along the coast. The actual consultancy was 6 months, and as you can see, it was completed sometime in October 21, basically, and recently published.
Mm-hmm. And I know that the disclaimer says that these are your opinions and your statements and your conclusions and so on, and so nobody is mandated to implement them and so on. But obviously, this will be circulated or has been circulated to the relevant authorities, I imagine.
Yes, it has been published, and also it's been sent out to the various governments: Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, St. Lucia. And I'm hoping that it actually is copied to CARICOM and the OECS in terms of the body of work, what it speaks of, and the relevance and the timing, especially since all these islands have a huge focus on expanding the tourism product.
And let me say that this document is to my mind, recommended reading for policymakers, persons who intend to become policymakers, civil society, the National Youth Council, people who will be inheriting both the environment and government in a few years' time, because it basically details what the yachting sector has been about, gives a little bit of history, and gives some depth in terms of what it is, its impact on both the environment and the economy as well. And I think that should be recommended reading for almost the entire country because of the recommendations and also because of the depth of the knowledge that you put in there as well.
Yes, and also going back to this whole expansion of tourism, the document speaks of knowing or working towards our carrying capacity in terms of hotels, tourism sites, yachting, cruise ship, etc. Because pollution is a real-time issue, and it is happening. It may have slowed down during COVID, but it's increased substantially. Since this document has been written, you've seen a booming of that industry. So definitely I suggest that it be mandatory reason, especially for the stakeholders and cabinet, as you said, the policymakers.
So you've worked with the yachting sector for quite a bit. And you're looking at, obviously, the cause, the sources of pollution and so on that's coming from those yachts. We know with everything else that most industries tend to go green. Have you noticed that the yachting sector itself is making a conscious effort to go green, or is it business as usual?
Well, yes and no. In terms of places like Europe and certain parts of the west coast of America, yes, the yachting product is moving green. Unfortunately, I cannot say so for the Caribbean. And you said it, I've been blessed with the experience of working in the yachting sector as an operator. I managed a marina for almost 28 years. So it gives you a balanced perspective in that what I discovered or what I know now whilst doing this research paper, this consultancy, had I known it back then in the younger days of running Rodney Bay Marina, which is now IGY Rodney Bay Marina, I would have had a greater thrust for cleaner water, for the way we treat or manage sewage from visiting yachts, and also how we deal with anchorage spots. Because in a broader perspective, the document really speaks of the discharge of the yachts as they move around between Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and end up in the Grenadines. And there's a serious impact on the coral reef, which by extension, it impacts the fishing and therefore our livelihoods.
How much conversations have you had with the islands that you produced, that this report was meant to focus on? You've had interactions with the different islands in terms of the authorities there? Since the report?
Yes, significant. A couple of islands did reach out. Barbados has reached out, St. Vincent, and primarily I would say St. Kitts. They were concerned as to how they treat sewage, the way moving forward, and also to discuss best practice. Now, obviously, a lot of people will read the document and come. I think the first impression is that, okay, you want to create more regulations and prohibitiveness for the yachting product. It's actually the opposite. As you said earlier on during our brief conversation, if you have cleaner water, you'll have more tourists coming here willingly in the Caribbean to enjoy. So we have to look at it from the perspective of cleaning up our environment while being competitive. And I would say one of the few islands that's really moving towards that area is Barbados. They now have a Ministry of Blue Economy. So they have taken the report, and I don't think it's as a result of the report, but that's just one, bullet in the belt that really has put them on a path where they understand the sustainability, they understand the impact of the blue economy can have both negative and positive.
What are some of the key recommendations that you think, let's say you're doing a top 3 recommendations that you think that you want governments and civil society to pay attention to as of now, immediately?
The immediate key thing is, 1, the need for agencies to synchronize, to have that conversation, to collaborate, to understand. On many of the islands you have various agencies dealing with sewage, water quality, etc. But they're not talking to each other, they're operating in silos. The second immediate course of action we can have is to get yacht centers to be able to collect and dispose of raw sewage. It's critical, whether it's a boatyard, whether it's a marina. Traditionally we call them pump out stations. They could be mobile or stationary, but especially on anchorage spots. And the third is, somehow we need to explore, as islands, a strategic alliance with companies that are into technology. There are little things that we can demand that are fitted into yachts that traverse the Caribbean. And I'll give you an example. Martinique has close to over 10 to 20,000 charter yachts sitting in Martinique. And every month they sail past St. Lucia, they may stop, they sail past St. Vincent and end up in the Grenadines. But nobody is tracking the discharge of sewage or black gray water. And it may be that all we might need is a little device alongside there, installed alongside the GPS, to track these discharges and to be able to pull that data. So an agency like CAFRA would know what the discharge patterns are, where they need to enforce the regulations, and collectively, maybe the fourth thing is collectively the islands can agree as to spots that discharge of sewage, gray and black water, would be allowed. Because right now it changes from 3 miles to some islands to 6 miles to 1 mile offshore. But who is regulating it? There's no agency out on the water double checking that. So these are the 3 or maybe 4 things that I would really recommend we step up on.
Let me ask you something a little bit simplistic. Do yachts have to discharge black water while they're traveling?
Well, yes and no. Depends on how many people on board, the period of the voyage. Obviously, I don't think you need to discharge sewage or grey black water if you're moving from Castries to Soufrière. But it depends on the sewage, the holding tank, the capacity, etc., and how often you clean that tank. So I would say for short voyages, no. For long voyages, definitely. If you're crossing, going over to an island, 4 persons, I mean, I would expect a yacht to discharge.
You mentioned that there aren't agencies and so on out there who can enforce or police or even monitor. And just quickly, I know one time there was a talk about putting dyes, certain dyes. Is that an option as well?
Well, definitely. It's an option, especially for the boats who anchor out, let's say, in Rodney Bay, in Railway Beach. You know, if as soon as they cleared in, a port officer, you know, went down, sealed the holding tank, put a dye, so you know that if that person discharges, you know for sure he has discharged. There will be a dye around the boat, and he could be fined. You know, he can pay, or his boat can be seized. We need to start dealing with this issue very, very serious. It may sound draconian, but right now as I speak, there's several beaches, at least 3, along the west coast that people should not be swimming in. And it's not necessarily just because of yachts, but it's the discharge, consistent discharge of raw sewage.
Yeah, we need to make that distinction. That yachting is one of the problems.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of problems, and I think you mentioned tourism centers, but also inland. That's impacting as well.
The way we deal with sewage, you know, growing up, we have this image that once you throw something in the river or the water, it disappears. But that's no more. The pollution from plastics and sewage is significant. And where we put hotels, their sewage systems, their pump out system, tourism centers, for example, Point Seraphine, etc., where they're located and their sewage hookup needs to be important, because during this research, I found out at least 2 hotels that discharge raw sewage into the sea along the west coast, and that's a consistent habit
in this decade,
in this present dispensation, and that's very worrying. No matter if you're 5-star or 1-star, and that doesn't even make sense in that you're promoting your destination for people to come here. You want to say there's pristine waters and nice clear, and you're actually contributing to destroying it. So the agencies must be aware, they must step up the surveillance, and they must act. You need to find a couple of people, and you need to also build maybe a sewage plant in the south of the island. You know, one, and I'm just speaking specifically of St. Lucia, but one in the north of the island doesn't cut it, and it's obvious.
Especially if your population is going to increase, especially if you're trying to attract more yachts, more tourists to your country. Obviously, you must have a corresponding response in terms of preparing for those eventualities as well.
And that's why in this consultancy, I purposely built up the history of the yachting sector. You know, how it expanded, where the clusters are. And where the clusters are of yachts, often you find right there lies the problem in terms of pollution. And the grenadines, the coral, there are corresponding studies that actually support the findings.
There was a World Bank report recently that spoke about we can't even waste a minute more on those issues, marine pollution specifically they were referring to. And obviously we don't want to make the point that it's just yachting, that sector that impacts it. A lot of it comes from inland, from us who live on the island as well.
Yes, but you see, in our development, and you brought that point up, we need to prioritize. If we're going to be pushing for the expansion, more homes, build alternative centers, we need to invest a lot more in the infrastructure to handle potential pollution, which is raw sewage, black water, grease traps, you know, because it is obvious from the report that this all ends up within the waters of our coastline, whether it's Barbados, whether it's St. Lucia. And the problem is not unique to St. Lucia. That's one of the things the report showed. I mean, Barbados does not have huge marinas, but it has the same problem. so as Jamaica. So what the report is a good indication of where we need to start to focus to really deal with this long-term issue, because I don't think in any of the economic outlooks we're going to stop expanding the yachting product. In fact, the yachting product is expanding significantly as we speak, but I'm not so sure that we're balancing the regulatory aspect. As it grows, you will have issues that you will need to deal with, and this is one.
You mentioned Martinique has probably about 10,000 yachts, and you mentioned about expanding. So you're saying that we can't really control the expansion at the moment. We have to deal with it because it's something we don't have much control over?
Well, definitely. Martinique is Europe. Martinique yachting product exploded under what's called a defiscalization program, which started in the late 80s, early 90s. And based on that, a lot of yachts have been built. Obviously, they're based in the Caribbean, whether it's St. Martin, whether it's Guadeloupe, etc. But they sail south. So whether we have no control over that part of the economy. What we can begin to do is even have a conversation with them as to the type of boats they're building, the capacity of their holding tanks, and somehow have them understand that they're sailing within our waters, and this discharging will impact us. It's not a matter of if, it is already. I don't think the problem has been so significant that we can see gray water around the islands, but it's significant enough. So we can start by having a conversation with them and also working with them, because the expansion of the yachting product in Martinique impacts us. You know, they sail, they come, they visit, whether it's Jazz, whether it's Mercury Beach, whether it's Aqua Action, all these events. So we want to work with them and see how we can begin to put solutions to this problem.
The Martinique situation, I don't know how much you covered it, but in terms of their expansion, was there a corresponding increase in environmental issues with that?
Definitely. If you visit Marais, I have noticed the change in the water quality, the early 90s to now. But, you know, Martinique again is Europe, you know, it's France. So they have dealt with it in terms of pump out stations, testing the water quality, flushing the bay, etc. But that's in their territory. We can maybe lean on them for some assistance of doing that, but one of the easiest things we can do, and that's also an economic activity, is to be able to give concessions for young people to invest in pump out stations in Rodney Bay, in Soufrière, in Canaries, all along the west coast. In Labrie, you know, everybody now is saying Labrie is the potential latest new port of entry. These problems will also come on their doorsteps if they don't put systems in place to regulate and deal with them.
So the expansion of the tourism industry, yachting and so on, we seem to have this mindset that it's rooms. So we heard recently about 6 new hotels coming, and we talk about the rooms that are coming into St. Lucia. But you're saying, and I read in Grenada that there's a young man who invested in a boat and a pump house, and he goes out to the yachts and so on. I don't know if that's done here, but I get the impression you're saying that we can create jobs, we can get young St. Lucians to establish businesses in just correcting environmental issues.
Definitely. First of all, I spoke to the young man who has this mobile pump out station. He's doing very well. But there's a need for at least 4 of these mobile pump out stations. One in Marigot. Look at the water quality in that area. Soufrière, that Hummingbird area. Redwy, Rodney Bay Beach, right off the ramp. And if you pass there right now that the Ark is almost left the first and second, there are at least hundreds of yachts out on anchor. And this man or woman with small businesses can actually tend and service these yachts. So we don't need huge grand infrastructures that can be installed in, let's say, IGY Marina or Marigot. We can have individuals being entrepreneurs dealing with that issue. The other issue is that all the agencies have to recognize that once you pump that sewage out of a yacht, it has to go somewhere. So it may need that WASCO or the Sewage Authority may need to review its laws and its mandate to see how we treat. But that action and conversation needs to start yesterday.
And you spoke about realigning agencies and agencies speaking to each other and so on, but also there's need for agencies to be ahead of the game to, even next door Martinique, they can see what's happening here and almost be ahead of the game in terms of how do we deal with potential issues.
Well, I've found even the agencies here, from talking to them, there was very little, a kind of lukewarm response, no pun intended, to that issue. There are people, there are bodies in offices that are charged with the responsibility, but maybe for lack of resources, I think it's a lack of a champion. In a lot of these areas, we need a champion, whether it's in cabinet, whether it's somebody like me who just won't stop talking about a certain issue, whether it's yachting, whether it's the environment. But you need champions. We need civil society. You need to educate people, because, and it's a trend that I've seen, a lot of the visiting tourists now that come on cruise ships walk with a testing kit now. Okay? They test the water before they go in it. Now, God forbid, and I'm not saying that, if one of these people go to the wrong beach and test first, this will become something that may impact our tourism product. So why wait for that? Why not start testing the water ourselves and make the findings public so that we could solve it?
So there's a very real role there for civil society to play in that case, because the same way you mentioned that somebody who's traveling on a cruise ship will walk with a testing kit, that an ordinary citizen or even groups, student groups and so on, can start doing their research, testing the waters, and let's start discussing it. I know some people don't want to be alarmist, but the reality is it's an alarming situation.
Well, I think it would be wise for the testing of water qualities to be mandatory for a hotel to get their hotel license to operate. I mean, and this is Cuthbert Didier, and these are one of the reasons why there was this disclaimer in the consultancy, because if you're going to have a hotel on the beach and that hotel may or may not be practicing in activities that can pollute the water, there must be an outside regulatory agency that should come in and test and say, okay, the water quality has passed and this hotel is operating, you know, above par, etc. Because think of it, if there is no system in place to punish, catch, or correct any establishment that is actively in pollution, and I say actively because there's grease traps, black, gray water discharge. I mean, you go to Grosley, you drive any one day, and you look at the guttering. There are no grease traps. It goes straight into the sea. Full stop. Full stop. It's no but, no if. And if you and I can see that, we need to see the bigger picture. Because in Grosley, there's this little beach that people bathe and swim, etc. It's not disappearing. It's there. It's settling on the coral. You know, it's impacting our lives. For a long time, I've heard people talk about an air infection, you know, issues with their skin when bathing at certain beaches. And so it's been there. We now have to address it.
I know the challenge I'm having is we don't want to be looking at our policymakers and saying, well, we know they have their part to play, and we're not seeing that, like you mentioned, there's no champion there who is an environmental champion on either side, pushing environmental issues, even talking about investing seriously. And when I talk about investing, I'm not just talking about investing in infrastructure, but even education. If you give some certain scholarships to some young solution to go study water quality testing and the impact, the same thing you're doing in terms of the impact of the yachting industry and so on, at least we have more qualified people. But talk to us about, we know there's a very real role. What is the ideal thing you'd like to see at least our Ministry for Sustainability Development do in terms of low-hanging fruits? Because there's always an issue that there's never any money to do anything. But in terms of a low-hanging fruit, what can our ministry do and civil society do almost immediately to start dealing with that situation?
Well, unfortunately, I will put our politicians and policymakers on the line. They need to prioritize. They need to find the money to invest the resources to check on the water quality on all these islands. Full stop. It starts with them, you know, because they make promises, they win the elections, they sit at the table. That needs to be a priority. But I also think that communities need to play a more active role. We have a very active SLHDA. They do some very good cleanups. I think also they need to begin to focus on water quality, educate the restaurant owners, make sure, little 8 tips, build a grease trap, the sewage, empty your sewage, etc. But in general, as a society, and I speak to all the islands, but I focus where we live, we need to become more conscious of our environment and cleaner people. I go down to Soufrière often these days, and I am appalled. I am really appalled at the garbage, the discharge, I don't want to get into the things that enter the beaches that surround the pitons, etc. And it doesn't matter the location. We need to become more aware and respectful of the environment. But I also want to say, parallel to that, we as a country need to understand our carrying capacity. How many cruise ships can we really handle on a yearly basis? How many yachts can we realistically handle? What is the cap for our present infrastructure? I think IGY Rodney Bay Marina has done a good job so far. It has a pump out station. I think it needs more, especially in the boatyard. But they need to be champions. Somebody needs to really make it mandatory that if you're going to drop anchor, if you're going to develop anchorage spots, and even if they develop spontaneously, 2 things must happen. You must have a buoy system so they don't destroy the coral, and you must have mobile pump out stations to ensure that these boats are not dropping or discharging into our waters. And that needs to be a priority. That needs to be a priority for any district rep along the west or east coast, full stop. I put it on their step. They can be creative, because some of them are very creative when they want us to react. So I think that action needs to happen, and it needs to happen yesterday.
Let me ask you something that I know you mentioned that there's this fear of too much regulation and so on, but the other issue that people are afraid to raise and deal with has to do with the levies and taxes and so on, and there's never any money to do anything. So is there and since you say like Martinique gets 10,000, I don't know exactly how many yachts we get going through here, but is there some kind of a levy we can impose, like an environmental levy on the yachts?
I'm not sure if we can, but that's something to think about, to consider. It may be that we can have a one fee that can cover environmental levy, anchorage, mooring, etc. But the idea of 250 yachts dropping anchor for free in an anchorage spot for a whole year, there should be a fee, whether it's a mooring fee that covers all these taxes. But definitely, we can become creative. One of the most creative agencies and progressive agencies has been SMMA. I know you guys have featured them quite often, but that's the best practice. The SMMA has been studied by all first world countries, the Great Barrier Reef. Why not have a St. Lucia Marine Management Association along our west coast and take the best practice of Soufrière, which by the way is beginning to have challenges, but take the aspects that work and spread it along the west coast from Labrie all the way to Rodney Bay. It works. Boats come, they have moorings, they tie up, and they pay. In that, we can monitor what they discharge, whether you put a dye system, etc. But the conversation must start. And I have no problem in adding an additional fee if it's going to go towards the environment, and if you explain to yachtsmen and women what it's for. Because you'd be surprised, there are those that discharge, but there's also yachtsmen and women who are very environmental friendly, and they will call you out when they see such things happening.
Is there kind of a discussion on is there a grouping that we can engage to speak with the yachts that go through the region? How do we communicate with them?
Well, there are a lot of, each island has a marina association. I'm not so sure if St. Lucia's one is functioning, but I think CAFRA is one agency that can stimulate that discussion. The ministries of tourism, you know, unfortunately, when we speak of tourism, I hear hotels and cruise ships. Nobody says yachting or yachts. And maybe it's time for the new champions to step forward and have a voice and say the yachting sector is significant in its economic contribution. The Marina Association, because marinas and boatyards and yachting employ a lot of people. So yes, I think there is a mechanism to start the conversation, but I think it would help if CAFRA, apart from publishing the report, you know, really reached out and engaged the ministries of tourism and private sectors, the hotel association, etc., to really expand on this conversation to see what they can do in terms of recommendations and how we can move forward.
Yeah, because I was about to ask in terms of CAFRA playing a key role, a lead role in the discussion, the dialogue with the hotel association, with all agencies that are related to it, and civil society, because I don't think we've seen CAFRA getting very aggressively involved in...
And they should be. I don't know what their mandate is, but the time has come. Everybody keeps talking about tourism, but we should be discussing all aspects of tourism. And, you know, recently I heard a politician expand and said, you know, tourism is resilient and it is going to expand. Without a doubt, that is true. But with that are going to come some challenges that we need to put in place solutions. We need to deal with it. And apart from that, there's now global warming, there's erosion, there's sustainable issues. So we really need to sit down. I think maybe it's time to take a page out of Barbados and have a ministry of the blue economy, because these issues are so serious.
I certainly agree with that. I know for years you've been talking about St. Lucians taking ownership of, you know, yachting as well. It's not just tourism and we get employment, we get some jobs here and there, but in terms of ownership, I'm happy you mentioned the fact that even with the boatyards and so on, and they create a certain number of jobs, but a lot of those jobs are among self-employed people who set up little small businesses and work. Because I know there are people who do laundry, who do, even the guy who's supplying fruits and so on, that's a business.
Exactly.
And that can be expanded. Can that be a route? Because most St. Lucians wouldn't take ownership of something until they figure there's a direct benefit in it for them. And I don't think in 2022 we should be talking about benefits being just working at a hotel. That we need to be owning, somehow some of those hotels are owning key services that feed those hotels. So in the yachting sector, what are some of the jobs that, and we mentioned about the pump house and so on, and this guy in Grenada, what are the opportunities that young solutions can start working on almost immediately with very little startup to start getting involved and also playing a key role in cleaning up the environment as well?
Well, one of the easiest routes within the yachting sector is what they call the boat boys. I prefer to call them, you know, yacht freelancers, meaning you represent a boat, you help the master or the yacht captain clear in and out. You have a lot of that in Soufrière. The other thing is simple thing like cleaning a vessel, you know, helping scrub the bottom of a yacht with barnacles, diving. So somebody who gets his dive master could actually advertise him or she to clean the bottom, to scrape it off. Obviously, you will need permission from fisheries as to where you do that. Then there are men and women who can enter sail makers. St. Lucia has only one sail maker. I'm not so sure if he has a system of the transferring of skills, but he's not going to be there forever. Mechanics, there are a variety of vessels that come with different engines, whether it's Caterpillar, Volvo, Penta, Yanmar, you name it, Mercury. So, but I think in all of this, one of the key things in terms, and think of a yacht as a floating home coming on your shores. Think of it as a floating hotel room. Everything you and I do in the local economy, visiting yachts people do. They simulate themselves into our local economy. So whether you want to sell fruit to them, whether you want to help them provision, whether you want to give them a tour guide, whether you want to be able to sell unique tours, Or, very, very simple, whether you just want to be able to say, this is your itinerary while on the island or the Caribbean, and charge a fee. There are a lot of opportunities, and some of us can be very, very creative. We just have to respond to the market, address it, and I think it will have a very spontaneous, natural growth. But if you think of it, from the holding tanks to plumbing to machinery to electronics, all these things that the maintenance you put on your house, a yacht owner needs it for him or her yacht.
Senator is currently promoting the concept of yacht registry. We were in Dubai as well, helping to push that concept. Can that be a vehicle that can be used to communicate with those yachts?
A massive vehicle. You know, I always tell people, you remember the movie Hitch?
Mm-hmm.
The movie starts off with what? The back of a powerboat with the St. Vincent flag and Kevin Little's song, Turn Me On. Now, for the average eye, they wouldn't catch it, but that scene alone, you couldn't pay for pushing the yachting sector of St. Vincent. So the yacht registry is a spontaneous, natural way of marketing the destination, because your showcase piece is the flag of the destination. Now, there are some very serious issues in terms of maritime law that we need to have in place, but we're slightly behind the curve. But I will say, as somebody who's been really pushing for it, it's a little too late, but with everything else we have going, the CIP, etc., our yachting registration program can be very unique, and we can include concessions that can include or incorporate CIP, residency, etc. But it's a very, very lucrative program. I would like to see it a little more aggressive in terms of getting to the final stage, but it will definitely help the yachting product.
But can we make sure we put a stipulation in there that if you register your solution and you're carrying a signature flag, that you need to have a certain level of green consciousness and certain respect for the marine environment?
We can be very creative. We can state something like the amount of staff or crew that should be from St. Lucia. We can promote green energy. We can promote sustainability in terms of making your own water. There are a lot of little caveats we can include, and we can be creative. But the idea is to push them and have that collective conversation, whether it's from the marinas, the boatyards, etc.
I know there are no obligations to adopt any of your recommendations and so on. Is it a public document right now? Can any member of the civil society request a copy of it?
Yeah, definitely. It's public.
And if they need a copy, how can they get it?
You can go to the website. The link I can send you.
We'll post it on the screen.
And yeah, it's an open document. It should be printed. It should be discussed. Tear it apart, especially the recommendations and the findings, and encourage that discussion. But I will definitely support printing it out. I mean, showcase. It's on the internet, so it's right there.
Yeah, because we seem to have, and especially from CAFRA as well, quite a number of reports that are gathering this or in some folder somewhere.
Yeah, there seems to be a reluctance to really promote these reports. I don't know why. I think CAFRA might be better off explaining, but this consultancy is, I think, the first step. I think the second step should be, one, discussing solutions with limited resources, but have that conversation.
Definitely, and I think one of the things I keep mentioning it because I think that's one way of getting solutions interested and involved and taking ownership of it as well, is to identify as much as possible job opportunities that there are for young St. Lucians to find themselves in there, and at the same time you're solving a problem. You're also economically helping out the country as well in terms of finding jobs, creating jobs, and so on.
I agree with you 100%. But who is going to take that step? Which agency? Will it be private? Will it be public? Or will it be a partnership?
And I think you're trying to encourage in your, that is the heading, a public-private partnership as well. We really appreciate your time. Before we go, I know you focus mainly on yachting and tourism centers, and I know there's been a lot of talk about even the cargo ships and other cruise ships coming through the region. Is that an issue, or is that your next consultancy?
That's a huge issue. I know, excuse me, I know SLASPA is working very, very hard on that. So I don't want to steal their thunder, but definitely it is an issue, and SLASPA has right now before the Attorney General some regulations in terms of the MARPOL Act, which my good friend Mr. Christopher Alexander is really pushing, and hopefully by this year it can be out of the chambers and pass as law.
And what is key is, like everything else, enforcement, because we seem
enforcement.
All right. We will certainly have a lot more conversations with you on this, and there are so many other things that we need to discuss at some point in time, but we certainly want to at least thank you for this report. And like I keep stressing, it has to be recommended reading for any young person now who is interested in serving the country in whatever capacity, whether it's as in the creative industry or as in public service or as a policymaker or just as academics, that this document ought to be in the hands of students, especially those who are doing environmental studies.
Well, you run a station.
Yes, we're playing our
I guess
part.
you can collaborate with Sir Arthur Lewis. I don't want to get so close to home, and I'm sure you have links with Sir Arthur Lewis where you can do that.
Yes, definitely. And we know there's Dr. Marie-Louise Felix as well, who's there, and she has some environmental science students. Yeah. So we certainly will engage them on it and make the copy available to them if they don't have it already. But certainly start that conversation with all schools on the island, because especially in the rural communities, canneries, I know canneries has an issue as well with the water.
Ancillary, Marigot, yeah. And make it, at least the findings and the recommendations can be, tailored towards class discussions, or even have a school debate surrounding a way forward, what young people can do to mitigate some of these issues.
Yeah, and let's go for the low-hanging fruit, because everything...
I mean, I would be willing to sponsor some sort of secondary school debate on this, on the pros and cons and the findings, without a doubt.
Well, we'll certainly make it happen. Again, like I said, we certainly want to have a continued conversation with you on these and other issues, issues of empowerment and so on. But we want to thank you for this. And when a consultancy like that happens, do you have a natural follow-up? What's the natural follow-up to it? Or is it just,
The natural follow-up is sometimes separate islands calling for your intervention in terms of implementing recommendations. I've had some brief discussions with the BVI, even if they weren't part of the study, and a lot of discussion with Barbados.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.